Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. Chewy, good evening to you, sir.
Hello, Pat.
Hi, mate. Kia ora. Doing well? You're looking like you're ready to go out to the bush, mate. You got to go catch some deer or something.
Oh, I put on my most shriveled hoodie and my most ragged worn hat. What more can a discerning broadcaster wear?
Broadcaster, that's a strange term, isn't it? In fact, speaking of broadcasters, we're going to be talking a bit about media tonight and broadcasters and people making decisions, and how does an individual, group, or organisation possibly keep themselves out of court, and what is journalism, and lots of things. Because I'm sure you've all heard the news by now. If you haven't, you'll know after tonight's show that Mr. Plunket has been charged. We'll look at the details in total. There was a court hearing today that he apparently wasn't at, although he has put questions around the stuff story, but he hasn't explained what's wrong in the stuff story. Is it going to be one of those ones, remember the Chantal Baker one, where they're all laughing because they listed her age as 30 and she was 29? In other words, so technically it was a wrong article. Is it going to be something like that, or is it going to be more substantive? I know, we will find out. But also, there's actually quite a bit to get onto tonight. We're going to be having a look at the no-frills budget. We're going to be looking at Christopher Luxon not answering questions again. In fact, exactly the same question, not answering the question again. And also, David Parker on the AM show this morning. And it's an interesting... You know what I struggle with, Chewy? Sometimes if I say the opposing position, when I can come up with a better question that they should be asking David Parker than the opposing position asks, I kind of go, how terrible are you at your job? If I could actually find a question that would make it difficult for him to answer and you can't, then what land are we living in here? And I'll tell you what their question is when we show you some video about him and our mate Ryan Bridge debating what is money, which is the conversation this morning. But what is money? That's not real money. It's pretend money. What is money? So we'll have a look at that. So anyway, let's do this before we get into it, and we're going to move pretty quickly tonight. Huge thanks to all our patrons. In fact, there are 2 new names on the fuel, the Elon Musk level. Kimberly down there, who actually signed up yesterday during the show, got a shout out last night and another one again today. And DIY Guru jumped in today and decided to join up on the fuel level. So Guru is now part of the official whānau. And to all the people who are our patrons, remember this Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Lie down, girl. Down. At 11 a.m. this morning, Saturday morning, we're going to have a virtual meetup. If anyone becomes a patron between now and then, I guess between, Saturday, sort of 10 a.m., we'll stick the invite out to you as well. At some stage, there will be there's layers in there, levels, and the level of meetup only applies to some, but because we're kind of appreciative of everybody at the moment, we're leaving it open, but we will at some stage lock it down and shut it down, so to a particular level. But for now, everyone's available. Everyone should come along. And I think are we going to see you, Chewy, this Saturday as well, maybe?
Oh, I think I might pop in.
Pop in to say, kia ora, or to say, hello. As a lot of people mimic from you saying as well. So yeah, lots to get onto and lots to look at today. Let us just rip straight into it. I think we'll just rip straight into it, eh? Announcement from Chippy today around what's going to happen in the upcoming budget. I kind of think 2 things. The first is it's interesting that they've had this information come out yesterday about the wealthy not paying enough their fair share in tax, yet they're sitting down saying there's going to be nothing new. And I'm like, it's an interesting tactic, because I guess if I was to weigh this up, right, and I was to go, what would the voting base want more? Would they want you to say right now, we are going to do this with taxes? Or would they want you to not do that because nobody likes taxes. You know what I'm saying? Like, so what's the pros and cons? I was thinking for a Labor government, actually making some announcements about stuff that's coming up next year is what they should do. Now, they still may do that because they've just said no changes this year. But next year would be a new term. And so I think we still may find perhaps coming up to there'll be some decisions.
We've gone down that path before though, Pat.
Yeah.
Haven't we?
Yeah.
You know, it was just going to, they were just going to cement their victory, and then they'll be brave. Then they'll use their absolute mandates, their majority, to push some truly brave policy. And then they have a partner who says no because they don't have majority anymore by themselves, and that's about it. Anyway, let's have a look. And I actually was going to play some of Chippy's actual speech, but I saw this article tonight, and I thought this is actually better because a lot of National's talking points are being taken away. And one of the talking points is immigration numbers at the moment. Now, all National's going to be able to do, and they kind of have started doing this, is say, oh, I'm so glad they started doing what we said they should do. Look at the results. Because when the results, like when inflation comes down, National loses a talking point. When immigration numbers go up, National loses a talking point. So it will be interesting to see how these are spun by the National Party. But here's Chippy talking today. So we're not going to play the actual interview, which I would have done, like the 20 minutes of it. Well, I see we're going to play the actual story and have a look what he had to say about the upcoming no-frills budget.
Well, the Prime Minister's given the strongest hint yet that this year's budget will be a sober one. He's calling it the no-frills budget to reflect the times that the country is going through. And there'll be two main focuses, the cost of living and cyclone recovery. They are the two biggest immediate issues. And for the first time, an official estimate of the cost of recovery from the cyclones has been put at between $9 and $14 billion. Chris Hipkins was at pains to make it clear that there will be no new taxes like a wealth tax or a capital gains tax in this budget, but he did say there will be investment in the infrastructure for skills and science. Political reporter Amelia Wade has more.
After quite a fancy lunch of beef, chicken salad and out-of-season asparagus, the Prime Minister told Kiwis to think of him as home-brand Chippy.
This year's budget will be a no-frills budget. It befits the times that we're currently living in.
Using his pre-budget speech to swear he is a sensible spender.
It's not right for households to be tightening their belts if the government isn't also being seen to be doing the same.
I am very sceptical of their ability to be able to do that.
Chris Hipkins has quite a bit to pay for.
Now, I don't think it says it in the story, but just so you know, in the actual announcement, the whole 25-minute speech he made, unless I'm wrong, he does say it in this, he said, if a household needed more money, they would borrow. They wouldn't just get more income. I actually disagree with that because lots of people I know, if they want to build a kitchen or refurnish something, they go out and get a part-time job. So I don't actually agree with him, but I guess he's saying that there's going to be no new taxes. I also want to say this: if our GDP is about $250 billion, 250 billion, and let's say round figures that the cyclone's about 12 billion because it said 9 to 14, it's somewhere in the middle there. That's about 5%. I don't know of too many household budgets that would be able to just to absorb 5% new costs without doing anything. But he's kind of saying we're not doing anything and we're going to pay for this. We're going to pay for this. So they're going to borrow. But I don't know how I feel about that, Chewy, in general, because, I'm okay with an extra $1 a week out of my tax increasing to try and pay for something rather than putting us further into debt. What do you think?
I always get very nervous when a government running a whole ass country, I should say, starts comparing their budget to a household budget.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen so many times before. It leads to austerity. A country's books do not work like a company's books or a household's books. It just doesn't. Stop making that comparison. It's stupid.
All right, we'll keep going.
The cost of the devastating Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle could be up to $14.5 billion.
That's more than the Kaikoura earthquake, but significantly less than the Canterbury earthquake.
And you'll pay for it by borrowing more and spending less. No frills and no taxes.
There'll be no new taxes or levies.
He said that like 4 times.
To pay for the recovery.
No new taxes at all. Well, at least this term, even after the Revenue Minister set the cat amongst the rich yesterday, with Inland Revenue's investigation finding the uber wealthy pay about half the equivalent tax of everyday Kiwis. The PM ruled out any new taxes before the election,
Why?
then ruled them out again.
Because it's a bad
and
look.
again.
The government will not be introducing
Fuck 'em.
any major new taxes. We won't be rocking the boat by introducing major new taxes.
There is an out there. Did you pick the out in his statement? Any major new taxes. So what if it's a minor new tax? You know, so that I'm just saying, I'm not suggesting they're going to do that, but that word major is relative, isn't it? So if they're not going to introduce any major new taxes, what about a minor tax? Maybe. Just putting it out there.
1,000 minor taxes for the rich.
Taxes, I have made that absolutely clear.
But he said Labor was still considering whether they'd be campaigning on new ones or even adjusting the tax brackets.
Now is not the right time to do that when we have a high inflationary environment.
A high inflationary environment, which he made a point of saying was on its way down, partly thanks to what is now skyrocketing immigration.
Yeah, check this out.
You asked the government to take steps to attract more labour to New Zealand.
Yeah, you asked us to do it. We've done it. That's why I'm saying National's going to lose a talking point.
And we have, and those actions are starting to work.
New Zealand could be on track for 100,000 migrant arrivals in 1 year, which would be the highest ever net migration.
We haven't planned for this level of migration. We know we've got housing challenges. We know we've got infrastructure shortages. All of that is going to be even further exacerbated.
So you can't also have it both ways, though, can you? You can't say we need migrants. Hey, migrants, not enough houses. Like you can't have it both ways. I'm not saying one's not a problem and the other is, but maybe this will be National's talking point from tomorrow. It'll be like, well, look at the house prices are going to go up, etc., etc., etc. But up until now, National's been screaming about not enough workers, need more migrants, and it's record-breaking migration. So what are they going to do to spin that? Probably start talking about housing, like the Infometrics economist just said, possibly.
I mean, they're missing a couple of tricks there as well.
Yep.
Like the past few years, there's been more houses built and consented than in the previous 10.
Yeah.
And like the highest net migration, we booted a whole lot of people out. A whole lot of people went back to their home countries and that sort of thing. So I think that's a little bit of almost scare reporting there.
You think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, open the borders, get people here working. They've done that. That's been a criticism by the opposition.
We need workers, but
Yeah.
we also need to make sure that they've got a place to live and that they get paid fairly.
100%.
And it doesn't depress the market for every other worker out there. So that's a hell of a balancing act.
You are right. That's the point, isn't it? And this is probably the political thing here, is politicians speak in black and whites, and we live in a world of grey.
Well,
and that's the situation. Right, let's keep going.
You know, there's been a house building boom in recent years. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet, though. So we've got to make sure that we get the balance right.
Getting the balance right, the unofficial slogan the Prime Minister has hung on Budget 2023.
And Amelia joins us now. Kia ora.
No, we don't. We have our own commentary on that. So what are your general thoughts about it? So a boring budget coming up, but boring, you know, sort of meaning no frills, like they've said, no frills budget. So like a basic, simple, not too inspiring,
boring,
safe.
uninspired.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
I think you've just said a fantastic word, because what happened with the last Labor government, the current Labor government under Jacinda, is they had an opportunity to do whatever they wanted to. They had an opportunity to be a transformative government. Yes, COVID got in the way massively, but there was nothing they could hang their hat on. So when COVID turned tits up, is that the right thing? Cock up, balls up, whatever it is, all of them up, and it went bad, they couldn't then go back and say, but these things are inspirational that we did. They were left with nothing. And so if it's going to be same old, I just got to say, you know, every political party goes through cycles, and if there's nothing that they can hang their hat on as a transformative, inspired, you know, follow my leader to the depths of whatever kind of policy, then they just end up being they're pretty boring, it's time for a change type government. You know what I'm saying?
Why go to the lengths of changing a law so you can generate the report that told us the information that it told us yesterday, and then run up to an election and do absolutely nothing with it?
Yeah. No, that's a very very good point. That's very frustrating. Is they've given us all this information about people being like people getting more than they should, and then they've gone, yeah, like what? So in other words, if you find the kid has cheated in the exam in the classroom, then you go, oh well, we might think about it for the next exam. It's like, what? Hang on, just
we've had two prime ministers now rule out new taxes, and I think Jacinda did it twice because they know that that's a bat that National will hit them with. But at some point, someone's got to stand up and go, you know what? We got through COVID. We got you all through COVID. We had this massive, massive cyclone, and we've got to do the recovery. And every single person has to stand up and put their piece in. And we've got this report that says that not everyone is doing it. So we're going to have to force you.
Yeah. Here's a crazy idea. This is a real crazy idea. What if they had a referendum and they said, we need another $300 billion over the next 30 years to pay for COVID, to pay for this, to pay for that, to get our infrastructure. Would you prefer, voter of New Zealand, that we up the taxes by XYZ, or we borrowed and paid it off over the next 100 years? I wonder what the response would be from the public.
No,
I wonder.
I just don't see why they're generating these reports and they're not doing anything with it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I think, we've talked about this before. If you're going to be supposedly the party of the worker, then back the worker. We don't not do something because we're scared of the dragons on their gold piles over here are not going to like it. Those guys are not voting for you anyway.
Yeah.
They're donating portions of their gold pile to your opposition because they don't like what you're doing now and you're not doing anything now. So you might as well do something.
Yeah,
it's infuriating.
It's an interesting point you raise. It's not just about these guys either, but like when National comes out and talks about, doing things for the farmers, they're preaching to the choir is what you're saying. They're already voting for you. So what does that mean? Why are you doing it? And what's it all about? And how do you get the other voters? So how does Labour get the other voters voting for them?
They turn around and say, hey, you work for a living and you pay your fair share and you don't hide your money. And these guys, they do. And if you vote for us, we will even the scales, because that is what Labour does. We're supposed to do. That's what the government's supposed to do. We're looking after the worker. We've spoken about that. That should be their core audience. Yeah. But National seems to pitch it that we're going to give you a tax card. That appeals to everybody. Nobody likes paying tax. People do like the things that tax buys, though. Yeah,
very, very, very true. Some of the comments that have been coming in about this story in particular: Hipkins needs to grow a pair and propose substantial tax change, CGT, capital gains tax, change thresholds, etc. Guru says, I assume everything they do will be announced in their election tax policy. I agree with that. All they've said is no tax changes this term. I do agree with that as well. And yeah, I guess it seems a little bit weird that they've gone, look at all this information, and we're going to do nothing with it right now. But wait till the election, then we might start using it.
This is when you're supposed to hype people.
Yeah.
Where's the hype? There's no hype.
They need a hype man. Who would be the Labour hype man? Willie Jackson. Would he be the hype man? Maybe. I don't know. Rose says they can still increase current taxes or even introduce a levy, i.e. not a tax. It's happened before. That's true. Time to Fly thinks we just sell Stewart Island. There we go. That's an easy way of doing it. And Paul, the other one, says the tax report knocks the winds out of National's tax cuts. It removed a major talking point for them that they can't broach without sounding hypocritical.
Fair,
yes.
Fair.
Yes, you're right. All right, we're going to keep trucking. Let us have a look at, we have a pre-recorded interview coming up for you shortly. If you follow me on Twitter, you may well have seen it. Now, if you don't follow me on Twitter, go and follow me, because what I actually uploaded today was a conversation that Chewie and I had a month ago after some of these findings came out, and we said, we think he's probably in trouble legally. And today, broadcaster Sean Plunket charged with publishing reports of restricted court proceedings. He was been charged with publishing a report court proceedings without leave. Now that just means without permission. And obviously, even though it doesn't say it explicitly, obviously they're talking about the family court thing that he posted to try and stick one up Dave Farrier to say, look at him, he's going to a court-appointed violence course which was all bunkum and proven not to be true. Not that it wasn't in the report, but that the allegation was false. That when I say it was bunkum to not be true.
This man, this veteran broadcaster,
Yep.
this storied journalism with decades of time spent in the reporting trenches, got absolutely snookered by a con man and managed to fucking fall on his own face. It's fantastic.
Well, but just also think in the last couple of weeks, like, I'll be honest, everyone makes mistakes, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone gets done occasionally. But in the last week or 10 days, there's been the Jacinda Ardern story about becoming a highly paid speaker that he commented on and had to apologise and withdraw. And now there's this coming back. And look, we'll say it very clearly. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. I'm not saying that just because I'm trying to be safe for us. That's the truth. These are allegations at the moment. But we know the background. We've seen the tweets. We've showed them to you. We've explained it. That he put out a family court document and he used a felt tip to scrub off the names, and then clever little clogs on Photoshop went and took the felt tip off, and therefore names got released. We won't go too much more into the detail because we've got a guest coming up in a second who we're going to talk in more detail about that with. But anyway, he did not appear in the Wellington District Court on Thursday for his first appearance. He has pleaded to 2 charges of publishing a report of family court proceedings, including identifying information about a person without the leave of court. Details of the charges cannot be published, also without breaching the court's rules over publishing. Plunket's case was remanded until a date in May. The charges carry a maximum penalty of 3 months imprisonment or a $2,000 fine. Then it starts talking about him being banned off Twitter, which is not really interesting to this story at all. I guess stuff needs to fill out their story a bit. Now, since then, So We're Fair, Plunket has come out on Twitter saying, actually, the story isn't accurate and the whole thing is a little curious. Doesn't say what's inaccurate, though. So is it going to be, Chantel's only 29, they said she was 30, or is there something more specific to it? Broadcasting, Sean, that's the title of the thing. So he says it's not accurate. And then one of the most ironic and hilarious things I saw while I was looking at his Twitter feeds before he came on is he's come out talking about TVNZ, right? And says, boy, they really don't have any idea what journalism is, do they? After he's just been snookered, as Chewie said, at least twice, and been shown up for having no journalistic sort of integrity, those 2 cases, releasing details from the family court and also the Jacinda one. But he's prepared to criticise One News because One News showed some stuff about co-governance and he's questioning their journalistic skills, Chewie. Before we play the interview, and the interview is with Professor Ursula Cheer, who is an expert in media law and defamation from the University of Canterbury. So I'm talking to her about this. But the floor is yours, sir, because I talked to her for 15 or 16 minutes. So if you've got anything you want to add in, this is your time.
I'm just busy leaving a message on Sean's Twitter.
Oh, yeah. Saying...
Oh, boy, they don't know anything about journalism. You got taken in by an obvious comment and breached court suppression orders. Journalism.
Okay, so let's get into this conversation, shall we? Obviously, this is a pre-record. If you want to participate in it and you want to chat in the chats, that's fine. We'll get back to them afterwards. But this is the conversation I had with Professor Ursula Cheer. I recorded it this afternoon, probably at about 4:30. And it's about the situation with Mr. Plunket, but it's also about some issues around what do media do? How should media stay out of court? What's the situation here? Talking a bit about name suppression, why it's important, etc., etc., etc. I think it's a very fine interview, Chewie, if I'm honest with you. Oh. Professor Ursula Cheer, and we will see you live again in about 15 or 20 minutes. Welcome to the show from the University of Canterbury, Professor Ursula Cheer. Professor Cheer, fantastic name, by the way. I'm sure you get that all the time. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was writing the email to you, and I say cheers to people all the time. And I was going to say cheers, and I cheer. So I said thank you, or thanks, or something. I changed the name around, so it's thanks.
No, look, I sign off cheers all the time, and I often think people must think I'm crazy.
At the University of Canterbury, you are in the School of Law and you are a media expert in law and defamation. And that's a really interesting conversation in and of itself, a defamation thing. We often hear about people saying, I've been defamed, but the standard being very high for proving what that is, and honest opinion being able to be used to get away from all of that. And that may have something to do with what's gone on in this story today about Sean Plunket. Very, very recently, at the time of recording this, we have heard that Sean Plunket is facing charges, has been charged, whatever the correct terminology is here. I should just bring it up, and I'm sure we'll have looked at this before we get to you, but is facing charges on, there it is there, and there it is there. There we go. Charged with publishing reports of restricted court proceedings. Now, our listeners and viewers know what this is about. It's about him basically being a dick towards David Farrier and trying to make accusations towards David Farrier based on things that were in a court document but have since proven to be a false allegation towards David Farrier. In releasing that information, he also released some of the names of the people in the document. Hence, I mean, I guess I got to be careful and say I'm assuming that's what it is. What else could it possibly be? But he says, the official writing says, broadcaster and founder of online news site The Platform, Sean Plunket has been charged with publishing a report court proceedings without leave, which I just imagine saying is a legal way of saying without permission or without the right to do it or something like that, because of name suppression. I guess before we just ask any basic questions, you've read the story and we know the background of it. Do you have any thoughts around, especially from coming, because he's in media and you're an expert in media law, any thoughts around it in general?
Well, there are many risks around reporting court proceedings generally. So, but there is but the basic principle that's your starting point around reporting anything of that kind is open justice. And there's been plenty of case law that set that out. We're meant to be living in a system where the courts are run on our behalf by the government, and we're entitled to know what goes on in the courts, and that things that are adjudicated on and cases that are going on, all of them mainly are being done properly and appropriately, and in particular, obviously, the main area where this is sort of high profile is criminal justice, and where you're talking about crime and things like that. So that's why we've got general suppression laws around the criminal justice system, and suppression laws interfere with that principle about open justice for special reasons. They're regarded as good reasons in New Zealand, and they're reasons around where someone's facing a charge or is engaged in a trial around something they've been charged for, a crime. It would be harmful to them, shown to be, usually the standard is seriously harmful, for their name to be disclosed is probably the main area where there's the most sort of publicity around suppression. So it's quite hard for people to get suppression, especially permanent suppression after a case. They do get what we call interim suppression quite easily, and the idea of that is that if you're facing a charge or you've been charged, you should have a bit of time to maybe go home and tell your family what's happening and so on. And it's not till your next appearance in court that you then have to make good grounds to keep the suppression in place. But and there's quite a lot of contention, especially from media, about the suppression system generally, because obviously it restricts information that the media might like to publish, and so they're very vigilant about suppression cases and who gets suppression, and they media have the right to apply for suppression orders to be varied if they think there's good reasons for that. So it's kind of an intersection between the media doing its job and the court system. But what we're talking about here is slightly different, because it involves a special court, and that's the family court. So I can talk a bit more about the special nature of that, if that's what you want me to do.
Yeah, please do, because the article that David Farrier wrote about it as a journalist, he's like, sometimes you can kind of push suppression in the courts, but you don't go near family courts. That's like it's like the sacred cow. You do not push boundaries there at all. So, feel free to unpack that for us.
Sure. No, absolutely right. I mean, in other cases, and in the criminal justice system situation, obviously media have to be very vigilant to check that there isn't a suppression order in place or still in place or whatever, and make sure they comply with that. It's not really what we're talking about here, because the family court is a special court. it deals with lots of sort of special jurisdictions around families and issues that can arise for families. So, I mean, it covers things like the Care of Children Act and Oranga Tamariki, those sorts of proceedings, Children and Young Persons Wellbeing Act, the Adoption Act. There's a whole bundle of special areas that come under the court's jurisdiction. And until 2005, that court was the most private court that we had in New Zealand. So you couldn't really report on anything that went on in the court. And in fact, media couldn't attend the court either.
Right.
And the reason for that was that it was recognised that it's a court where you've got extremely private matters that are being discussed, family matters, family disputes, disputes and issues involving children who are regarded as vulnerable because they're underage and can't really make decisions for themselves. So that privacy and that need to look after particularly children and other vulnerable people involved in family care type situations was not opened up to the media until 2005, and then things changed. And so now the media can be in the family court and they can report, but there are strong restrictions, as David Farrier has said, on what you can actually say. And the main thing to keep an eye on is not to identify anybody, not to anonymity is the key. Yeah.
And that's a place also where, like, if the adult has committed an act, like a violent act or something, they may get name suppression, but it's because of if the victim was a child, like saying a father XYZ, but saying the person's name, then you identify the child. So that's a place where even it's not the victim who gets the name suppression, maybe the offender does as well. And I understand that's pretty different from criminal court to family courts as well, because there are so many vulnerable children involved in the family courts, obviously.
Yeah. So what you have to worry about is not just that you're not identifying a particular person, particularly children. It means in not putting any information in your report that would allow that person or child to be identified.
Yeah.
So you have to take the extra care there around that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But a bit of a tangent. I mean, it's a silly tangent. I'm sorry, but this is kind of how
All
I
right.
roll. I've always thought, I've worked in the media for a long time, right, since the late 90s, on and off. I've always thought that name suppression should be applied to everybody until a guilty verdict comes out. Because quite often, like, so you say it's kind of hard to get name suppression. I've always thought it should be really easy to get name suppression. And then when it's guilty, unless there's a child or something involved, no one gets name suppression. Because so many people, like, I'm exaggerating a bit here for effect, but have their lives ruined or whatever over a charge that's they're found not guilty of. I'm always thinking they should have had name suppression. Am I just being like rose-tinted glasses naive, or is that something that could happen one day?
No, in fact, some years ago, the Labour government was interested in that, but it never came to be. So that has been proposed in the past, and some people do think it's a good idea. I've, throughout my career, being involved in researching and following media law, I've often been contacted by people who are petrified of having their names come out in the media, and I've seen the real distress that can cause. Now, since the law was changed, and we're still talking here just about general criminal procedure and name suppression associated with that, 2011, that area of the law was amended in order to tighten up the rules, because it was felt that too many suppression orders were being made, and that there had to be some conformity around the way they were granted and so on. So I think that statute that was passed in a special section put into the Criminal Procedure Act was quite a good reform, and actually has worked quite well. It has in fact reduced the number of suppression orders that are made. It is easier to get them at that interim stage I talked about. And then the idea is it's much harder actually to justify it. You have to come up with and have good reasons to go for whatever sort of suppression you're after that. So, and I'm inclined to believe that publicity around people who are charged with offending and so on can have really significant effects on the individual and or perhaps their family, their children in particular, if they're able to be identified through their parent and that sort of thing. So I think the distress and so on associated with this sort of thing is real. I think sometimes media are inclined to be a little bit harsh about it and inclined to assume that if a person has been charged, they're actually guilty. Now, the important thing is that you're mostly talking about a time when we don't know. They've been charged, they're awaiting trial. Now, of course, we've got another area of the law, the Contempt of Court Act, that covers fair trial and the need to have a fair trial, because obviously media coverage can negatively impact on how your trial is going, and perhaps if there's a jury involved, influence them in some way. So we do have that other area of the law, contempt, which a judge can use to try and ensure that the trial's as fair as possible, and that controls not only issues around naming somebody, but other evidence coming out and that sort of thing. So there's another area of the law that's there, but it has to be said that those laws, and indeed the laws around breach of suppression, are used sparely by the state because it takes resourcing. The police have to, investigate and charge and so on. And what they try to do, because of limited resourcing, my impression at least is that they save those sorts of charging for offences for the worst cases, to make examples of them. So that's why when people say to me, well, it's not fair that the media has to comply with these rules, but people on social media don't. That's not true, of course. People on social media take exactly the same risks and can be charged as well. So the risks are there.
Well, that brings us probably nicely back to the actual conversation for today as well. If you've just made a mistake, like it would appear, and I'll say allegedly, it would appear that Mr. Plunket has used a felt tip and scrabbled over the names in an attempt to redact it. And then those of us who understand Photoshop enough, clever little clogs, have got it on the internet and taken it off and revealed the names. Is there a defense to say, oops, I didn't mean to? Or does that not hold water in a court of law, especially when we're talking about family courts?
Okay, well, it varies. And I'm looking at the relevant section, which is in the Family Court Act from 1980. And it says that people can publish reports of proceedings in the family court, but you may not, without the leave of the court, publish reports that include identifying information where a person's under 18 and is subject to the proceedings and so on, or they're a vulnerable person. It exempts what are called sort of genuinely professional and technical reports, that as long as they're anonymised, they can be published, and it gives the power to the court to grant leave. Now, in this case, as we know, no leave was granted. So there's no discussion in this section, as far as I can see, this provision that talks about what we call the state of mind, and there's no special provision of any defence. So it looks like what we call an almost strict liability offence.
Because if he hadn't have released the document with his redaction, then those names wouldn't be out there, even if the case law says, hang on, that was a whoopsie. Yeah. But without him putting those out there, the names wouldn't be out there, no matter how they got out there from his document. He might have been
well-intentioned, and he might have done his best in the circumstances to try and redact it, as you said, without thinking what might happen. Who knows what his state of mind was, and that evidence might come out in the case. But assuming he was well-intentioned and did his best to limit it, and it's just through this unforeseen events and actions of other people that this has happened. It doesn't appear to be a special defence for mistake or anything like that. And things around his state of mind and his genuineness and his intention could really only be reflected in the sentence, any sentence that might be imposed. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. As a media expert, or expert in media law, I should say, from your perspective, what do media companies need to do to stay out of court? Like, we often hear about, there's this vibe at the moment about, public money, yada, 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 yada. Same people that say that about public money to do with media still like to go to their public health doctor and get their hearts looked at by public money. That seems to be okay there. But I've heard journalists say, for me to publish something, I need to write it. It needs to go to my sub-editor. It needs to go to the lawyers, and then it gets published. There's a layering of things. Yes. So from law in the media, what do media entities need to do? What should they do to basically stay out of court?
Look, I've just given a lecture this morning to some budding broadcasters, And because what I was emphasising with them, and what I always emphasise in my lectures to students, whether they're law students or journalism students, is care, just extreme care. So that layering that you're talking about, that's a system that should exist. There should be care all the way along. Now, what we've seen happen in the last 10, maybe even 20 years is because the media has been changing a lot and has been become less well-resourced than it used to be. My impression has been that media institutions have the risk, at the same time as the risk of publishing something in the wrong way has increased because of the development of the internet and other platforms and so on. The newsrooms have become less well resourced, so there's less people there to keep an eye on things. And often you've got quite young journalists there on their own, possibly not with that wiser, more sort of seasoned person in charge over the top of them. They're having to churn out more stories in 24 hours. They're very pressured. So that care, that need for care has been affected. Those systems that used to exist to make sure that mistakes weren't made or that, things were kept on the straight and narrow has been impacted negatively. And so the risks are greater. And then there's the other thing around media like you, who this growth in sort of small media outlets popping up, doing things online and so on. You're almost all just carrying the risk completely yourselves. So you need to either learn on the job pretty quickly or attend some courses, or I'm not saying you individually need to, but people like you, media like you, carry the risk completely. There are no systems. And right at the top of that pinnacle or near the top is the lawyer. Who's either, retained by the organisation. And that's really only possible for the larger media organisations now because of what it costs. And then it's the editor, finally, who makes the final decision. No matter what the lawyer says, it's the editor who makes the decision and carries the risk. So that person is usually still there. But often now, perhaps they're not getting that legal advice that they might have got in the past. I'm not just saying this to advertise and say that, legaling is a good idea and drumming up work for my colleagues. It's a definite thing, a definite real situation that is there and still is there.
No, look, I'm completely on board. I used to work in the mainstream media for talk radio stations, news and current events. So I've been through a lot of that kind of training, and we are very, very careful here. Like even right now, I'm about to do it because obviously Mr. Plunket is completely innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And I'm not asking you to comment on him in particular when I ask this question, but this kind of charge carries a maximum penalty of 3 months imprisonment or a $2,000 fine. What is the, nothing to do with Mr. Plunket now, but what is how often does an actual punishment come versus a slap on the wrist and a warning in this sort of situation?
Yeah. I can't answer that question. I don't know. It's quite rare for this sort of charge to arise in any event. As I said, that's probably connected to, when decisions are made as to whether somebody should be charged or not, and the way police operate. And I think, as I say, they do try to make examples of people now to try and make the law clear to others. So they can't and they don't charge everybody. They pick out more high profile individuals who appear to perhaps have breached the law, and they, as long as the evidence looks strong and so on, then they'll decide to proceed. So because they are using taxpayers' money, so they have to try and make it stick if they can. And again, like you, as I say, we've got, I'm not making any suggestion at all about whether or not Mr. Plunket has actually committed this offence. He's completely innocent until proven guilty. That's the way the system works. So yeah, that's I don't know how often they decide to. I wouldn't describe it as a slap on the wrist, but anything down from the in this case, it's as you said, the imprisonment for a maximum of up to 3 months and a fine of up to 2,000. Now, that's what we call a minor offence. Doesn't sound like that to ordinary people like you and me. None of us would like to be in prison for any length of time, of course. Imprisonment, of course, is probably the worst aspect of it. It would be kept in reserve for sort of the worst type of case. And it is only for a period of up to 3 months maximum. Now, all sorts of things enter the picture then, things like whether it's the first offence for this person, what their character is like, any other sort of pleas that, and information that would be relevant to that particular individual. Any judge would have to take those all into account sort of all together before they settled on whatever the penalty would be.
Very good. Hey, Professor Cheer, thank you so much for joining me today. I've very much enjoyed connecting with you and learning some more about the system. As we say, we'll leave to the courts what the courts are going to work out and decide, but it is a story that we've been following. So I really wanted to get some clarification on, what it could mean, what it does mean, why the courts do this, why the courts do that. Sure. So from the University of Canterbury, Professor Ursula Cheer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Pat. You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it. All the best.
Yo. So there you go. And yes, I got sprung playing hearts in the middle of the game, boys.
I was going to say that took me back to my radio days where it's like, listen to the sound effect. Hear the fifth caller through.
Okay, yes, sprung. But in my defence, I was in that interview and then I edited the interview, so I've already seen it twice. But Cheery, that's the first time you've seen it. So what are your thoughts?
Yes, there are so many pitfalls that if I was given $1 million by a family foundation, I would immediately find myself in court. But yeah, I found the comments about, just I guess the downturn in local reporting and court reporting and professional newsrooms and pivoting to more independent podcast type style things like what we do. It just opens it up to the Wild West.
This is one of the things that I think is the most hilarious. And when we talked, I should have got the clip out. When we talked to Paula Penfold, all these people who are like public money for places like TVNZ or Stuff. If Stuff writes an article, someone in Stuff writes an article that has legal ramifications, it goes to their lawyers, it goes to the sub-editor, it goes to the editor. There are checks and balances. Do they get it right 100% of the time? No. But Sean Plunket goes, I saw a meme on YouTube. This is now fact. Mm-hmm. No filter, no nothing. Any of these people do that. I mean, on some level, we do that, but I without kind of saying we're the shit. I mean, Chewy talked to you guys last night about the amount of time that we've kind of pulled each other up and have conversations off air. It's not, even though, I drive a lot of this, it's not a one-man show in any way, shape, form whatsoever. I think what happens on places like the platform is they've got a bunch of 20-year-old people underneath them who have never done this before, and it's a little bit like Heather Duplessis-Allen speaking a little bit about what's happening on the inside. I know people who still work at ZB, obviously, and there are several of them, multiple people I have to say, who have said she doesn't have anyone there to push back against her. They're all yes people, and they're all young, and they all look up to her, and no one says no. And that's a really dangerous thing to do in media, is to have people not say no. And it's what's happening the same as us. That's the same as us. I can do whatever the fuck I want. If I wanted to tonight, if I wanted to say or do, no one's gonna come up back on me except we don't. And I guess I'm being careful. I don't want to make it sound like our shit don't stink, but it seems that we don't and others do. I just hope that we can keep that level of professionality, even though we're a couple of bearded buffoons from the bottom of the South Island.
I guess our equivalent of having a lawyer come in and go, I don't think you should have said that, is when you have to snap my leash live on air when I go and say something like, yep, we should do this to Leo Malloy.
But also we have people around us. I mean, your missus, when we were having various conversations, was like, no, I don't know about that, boys. I know you should think this through. We actually have people around us who, if they know what we're doing, they get us to check ourselves and check what we're doing. And also for us, a lot of the time is why we're doing it. I don't think any other media agency really does that, about why. Because there's a reason why we do what we want. Others may just, this sounds a bit ugly now. It sounds like I'm trying to beat us up, well, we're the best. But there's been several conversations that we've had behind the scenes as to why are we doing this story? Why are we talking to this person? What's the reason for it? Not just, would it be a good clickbait? Would it be good eyes? Nothing. Time to fly straight away. Look, if any of you guys make t-shirts, we're happy to do a partnership with you. Shit don't stink. Now that's BHN merch material.
And then on the back it says, Sometimes it does, though, and then we can put the platform logo.
So, look, the other thing that I found particularly interesting about that, now that interview will be up on YouTube tomorrow. There's already a couple of clips on Twitter. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow. If you're a patron, you can already have watched it, because that's the other thing for our patrons. As soon as I do an interview or a long form something, you get it immediately. It's an early access, and then we play it out that night. So that's already on the Patreon, although you've all seen it now. But if you hadn't, it's already on the Patreon page. And tomorrow morning it'll get released to the general public, to the great unwashed. But one of the other things I found interesting was her talking about sometimes they want to make an example of someone. And I talked to the professor afterwards as we were wrapping up, and I'm pretty sure it was her. You know how you have conversations with 7 people and you got to remember who said what, but I'm pretty sure it was her who brought up whale oil as an example of someone that they wanted to make an example of. Because his offending under name suppression was so grievous, that they wanted to make an example of him. So the question is, now it sounds like you're picking on someone, or it sounds like you're being unfair, but I guess the other thing you're doing is you're saying, beware people out there who are flouting these laws. We are taking it seriously. Here's an example. It'll be interesting to see if Plunket gets made an example of in this. I mean, no one, I would think, thinks he's going to do jail time. No one, I wouldn't think.
No,
but it could be.
And it's a $2,000 fine.
But if it's a conviction, does that mean it's a criminal conviction? I'm assuming so.
Yeah,
and it's him. It's not the platform. It's Sean Plunket.
Yeah, for me, I think it's an important thing that he would be found guilty. The punishment doesn't really come into it. You know, it's $2,000. I'm sure he can take that out of business mummy and daddy's petty cash.
Yeah.
But it's more the fact that it is signed, stamped, and delivered. You fucked up and broke the law.
Yeah. Blakes says, I wonder if Plunket will get a stiffer penalty due to his report seeming motivated by malice. She talked about someone's state of mind. Someone's state of mind. When she said that, I kind of laughed and I thought, yeah, arsehole. Is that the state of mind? Is that what you do? But yeah, that's an interesting point, P. I mean, will that come into it? Kim also says mental health goes through the family courts as well. And there's another one here from P. Interesting interview, Ursula Cheer. I love that surname. Would watch her lecture on law for broadcasters. Yeah, I agree. It was just completely coincidental that she had said that on that time that she'd done it. Just happened to do it today. So there you go. Alrighty, we've got a couple of other stories we want to talk about today. Remember, this is our last show of the day. If you are a patron, though, we'll hopefully see you on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Your invites have been sent out to you. Let's have a look. Oh gosh, there's my notes. I've got to get all my notes and make sure I've got everything together. Who is this? This is Christopher Hipkins. No, that's not it.
Actually, just before you move on to that, this is interesting. I just saw a story. Stuff is going behind a paywall.
Yeah, I did notice that as well.
Talking about funding local journalism and stuff like that, it's got to that point for them.
Well, NZ Herald's been doing it for 4 years and quite successfully. ODT started it up not too long ago. Terrible model. And especially, I tell you, I kind of don't want to say this because I'm sort of going to give them an out. One of the terrible models about ODT is I do pay for the Herald because I got a special that was like $1.50 a month or something like that, something ridiculous. So I thought, well, it's nothing. We'll buy it for a year. And some of the stuff behind the ODT paywall is also behind the Herald paywall now. So it's like I don't have to do both. Not all of it, but I've seen a couple of times when I've been looking for something.
I mean, I think the Herald model's better, but I don't want to give the Herald money, even though there's some good journalists there. But by Christ, there's some bad ones.
I only do it to support Simon Wilson. You know me, Chewy. He's my
just give him $1.50.
It may not be $1.50 actually. I might be thinking about, because I also have subscribed to the Washington Post and the New York Times before as well, and I think they were $1.50. So maybe it was very cheap anyway. It was down from like 200 to maybe it was 50. Maybe it's more than $1.50, but whatever it was. Anyway, okay, let's have a look at Ryan Bridge dealing with David Parker and them debating what is money to do with the conversation, the research yesterday that David Parker revealed about 311 of New Zealand's wealthiest families.
How can you tax imaginary income?
Well, one, it's not imaginary income. I mean, I heard you say earlier that a large swathe of tax is paid by the super wealthy. It's actually not quite correct. It is true that people that are on high incomes, like very high salaries and wages, CEOs and highly paid professionals, they pay a big share of the tax. But the super wealthy don't, because 93% of their income is not earned through salary and wages. It's earned through investment returns, through their trusts.
So that's something just to be really aware of when we're talking about wealthy people in this. We're not talking about millionaires, we're talking about hundreds of millionaires. I remember Chris Rock did a stand-up routine and he was talking about the difference between rich and wealthy. And one of the examples he gave was Shaquille O'Neal, basketball player. Shaquille O'Neal is rich. The person that signs Shaquille O'Neal's check, that person's wealthy. So that was the delineation. So we're talking about wealthy people, not rich people.
And their companies. And that's what this study's looking at, those people who are effectively outside the tax net.
So you're talking about dividends.
Well, their tax affairs...
That was it, actually. That was all I was going to go. So talking about imaginary taxing, and I want to go on to the second part of it, imaginary money, and they kind of get a bit more toing and froing. That's a great freeze frame, by the way, as to what they mean by imaginary money. Remember I said, now I'm not saying that Ryan Bridge is my opposition, but when I can come up with a better question to try and prove his point than he can, that concerns me about the skill set of a particular broadcaster. They're continuing to talk now about real money versus money on paper, and we'll expand on that once we're done.
Look, if you've got $276 million at the start of the year and all your assets go up in value by 10%, you got $27 million at the end of the year that you didn't have
on paper. On paper. No, do you have it in your pocket?
Actually, what you've got is $27 million to go out and buy another 27 houses if you want. So,
but you don't
it's
have
money.
But it's not money. If your asset increases in value on paper, you don't get that money.
If I gave you another $27 million in your asset portfolio, you would actually have $27 million to spend on burgers or extra houses.
But hang on,
the reality is
we're talking about different things, because I'm saying if you haven't sold the asset, you haven't realised the profit, you haven't made any money. Are you talking about dividends, or are you talking about profits from companies, or are you talking about an on-paper increase in value from a company?
Well, the IRD, and this is their study, not mine, used international methodology critiqued by outside experts to measure what is the economic income of the wealthy. Yeah. And that's the answer. The answer is as in that report.
Yeah, but how much of it is on paper increases in value as opposed to actual money income coming in the bank?
Well, with respect, it's the wrong question, because when you've got $276 million worth of assets, you don't need to sell anything. You can just make the extra money on your investment portfolio, sell something occasionally.
But you're taxing, Minister, I'm sorry, but what you're talking
about... I'm not taxing anything extra.
I know, we're having a hypothetical discussion, but what you're talking about is taxing.
A hypothetical conversation to sow the seed that Labor's going to introduce more taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
An on-paper increase in wealth. And I think a lot of New Zealanders will find that unfair, even though, as you say, they're really rich.
Do you think so?
No.
I think that New Zealanders know every bit of extra overtime they do. Every time they get a pay increase, they pay extra tax on the extra money that they earn. But these people aren't. 93% of their income
But they're not earning it.
They are.
But they're not getting it.
Well, I'm sorry.
If I don't give you $5, you don't have $5, do you? You might be worth $5 more because your suit's appreciated in value, but you haven't got any money for it.
If I've got a portfolio of $276 million worth of assets, and the value of my assets go on, I've got the ability to buy even more assets. So one of the reasons why these gaps between the super wealthy and the rest keep growing bigger around the world, we have proven the effective tax rate of the super wealthy, and it is less than half. In fact, sometimes it's a third, actually, of what middle-income earners pay.
So let's just repackage this to make it real simple, yeah? So Chewy has a house. Chewy's very, very wealthy. He has a house and it's worth $1 million. Chewy's asset becomes worth $2 million. He's made $1 million. He is $1 million more wealthy. Labor is talking about taxing that increase in that asset. And Ryan Bridge is right. It's not money in his hand, but there is a financial benefit from it, because now Chewy can take that $1 million that he's just made on his house and go and buy another house. So it has a financial benefit to it. I'll tell you the question that no one's asking. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but this just shows we do actually walk and chew gum. There's a really big hole in David Parker's answers, and no one else has picked it up yet because they're morons. But Chewy, do you want to have a crack at what you've just heard?
First of all, Ryan Bridges has amazing hair, and maybe that's why doesn't have enough time to think of a decent question. I think that the thing is here, he's trying to make this conversation relatable to his listeners, to the people watching morning fucking TV. But when we're talking about wealth at this level, it is kind of theoretical. It doesn't relate to anything. Like, the way that Elon Musk runs his life is probably a good idea. He's got so much money, people will give him money because he's got money, apparently.
Yeah.
And it's all theoretical. You're operating at that level. You are not exchanging stacks of cash. You are exchanging promises on your ability to make more money. And you know, on a gross level, yeah, you can go, oh, okay, I see what Ryan's saying there. They've got the asset, it's gone up in value, but he hasn't sold it, so he hasn't made an income off the asset. So
he's saying he doesn't have the money to actually pay the tax that they're saying, but that's irrelevant.
I can kind of see where he's going from there. Yeah. But I mean, if you're someone that's sitting on fucking $1.5 billion worth of property, and you go to your bank, I want to buy more property.
Yeah.
Here's what I borrowed off you. This is what it's worth now. I'm a sure bet. Give me money.
Yeah.
It'll just happen. It just happens. It's on a different level from what Ryan is trying to dumb it down. I've given you $5. Do you have $5 now?
So
it's so dumb.
So here's the one hole that no one's talked about yet. And I know Ryan Bridge watches us religiously with his bottle of lube while we're here.
He puts the lube on his hair, just to be clear.
Yeah, just to be clear. Is that if what we're saying is you own these assets have a capital gain, they increase in value, we tax that value, right? Therefore, should those assets reduce in price, like the whole market, housing market has over the last 12 to 18 months, do they get a tax refund? No one's asked that question yet, but if you're charging tax...
Very good.
I know, exactly. That's the question no one's asked. But if you're going to bring in something, and they're not yet, but if you're going to bring in something that basically taxes people on paper wealth increase, do you therefore give them a tax refund when it's on paper tax losses? Because I tell you what, any smart accountant will be able to do that any day of the week, no matter what your assets are.
And this is what I'm really wary of. I made a passing reference to it yesterday. If they're going to look at redoing taxes, is close as many fucking loopholes as possible, and keep closing them, smash them.
Yeah, but that's the equivalent, isn't it? If you're going to get taxed on assets giving you an increased wealth, then surely there must be a refund if your wealth decreases. That's logic. That's logic. If your business makes $1 million this year, you pay tax on that. If your business loses $1 million that year, you don't.
Yeah, Ryan Bridge simping for millionaires is detestable. I don't like it. I'm going to say, look, I'm not an expert at this stuff. I can show you everything that I've learned from money I learned in my teens,
right?
And that's from this clip.
Oh, $20. I wanted a peanut. $20 can buy many peanuts. Explain how. Money can be exchanged for goods and services. Woohoo!
And that's it. That's all I know. So don't take my investment advice. But I'm sure I know more than Ryan Bridges.
All right, let's have a look at the last story of the day. And this is actually a little short one because I really, at the same time that David Parker was on AM show this morning, Christopher Luxon was on Breakfast. And I think I just wanted to show you again, because we talked about this last night, about Christopher Luxon telling us, remember, he told us that this is a job interview. And my question was, if this is a job interview, have you ever been into a job interview, you and I, where someone's asked you a question and you then haven't answered it? How disrespectful and ridiculous that is. So the first question today, we're not necessarily going to listen to much of the answer because there's two quick clips here before we go off for the week. The very first question was about the tax being fair. Let's have a bit of a listen to it.
Nationals leader has previously said he reckons our tax system is fair. Does he still think that in light of this news? Christopher Luxon joins us now. Morena, Mr. Luxon. Is the tax system fair?
Well, morning, Anna. Look, the real challenge, or the real question here is, what's the point of David Parker's speech and all these reports?
The real question is the one you just got asked.
The point is they want to shape for a capital gains tax, and Chris Hipkins is sitting on the fence, not ruling it in, not ruling it out, but he needs to do so like his predecessors have done, because what we want is not this distraction. We want this government focused, and needs to be focused on actually dealing with rising interest rates, rising inflation, a slowing economy, and rising levels of unemployment. That's the thing that's going to help most New Zealanders.
Hang on. Rising levels of unemployment.
What's a distraction about pointing out that the average Kiwi wage earner is
What's the
paying
distraction here, Mr. Luxon?
20.2%, and people who can realise their capital gains, those of us who might own 7 properties in total, are not going to pay any tax on those and pay an effective tax rate of only 8.9%. That doesn't seem fair. It seems like it's worth pointing out.
Well, look, what
She's
I
very
just
good.
say is how much the wealthy own or don't own is irrelevant to actually middle New Zealand.
This is a really important point, right? He's going to start talking about it doesn't matter how rich the rich people are. That doesn't impact people. Now, we found out yesterday, was it 7,000 properties were owned by those 300 families? And if they're holding them in a literal land bank, of course that impacts other people. It's one of the reasons that potentially we have a housing shortage. You know, imagine if those 7,000 houses or properties, let's say half of them, I'm making up numbers, went put onto the marketplace. Housing problems might be eased up. So to try to say, which he's about to say, that it doesn't matter to the average person what these people make is just utter horseshit.
Well, look, what I just say to you is how much the wealthy own or don't own is irrelevant to actually middle New Zealand, who are really struggling with rising inflation, rising interest rates, and a slowing economy.
Dropping inflation.
Prices, you know, I was in a
Dropping
budgeting
inflation.
session with a family who are at risk of losing their homes. What happens here with the wealthy and what they do or don't own doesn't impact on that. What they need is a tax break. We're the only party offering them a tax break, and that's important because the middle income earners in New Zealand cannot get ahead. They work incredibly hard. They have good jobs, average incomes, can't get ahead. And that's why we need a proper economic plan to run this country.
No.
Hang on. You say it's irrelevant, but it's not. They've missed out on $200 billion worth of tax that could have been clawed back from capital gains on property in this country. The middle income earners would not be feeling the pinch if the government had more money to invest in infrastructure and could help with more public programs because it collected more tax off capital gains. It's not irrelevant.
Look, I totally disagree, Anna. The gross underearners here is actually this government. It has spent heaps of money. It has printed a lot of money. It has actually shut the economy down. As a result, that is what has actually led to inflation, and that is what has led to this massive growth in asset classes or this asset price inflation that we've seen. And that is what's hurting middle-income New Zealanders. And that's why we're really serious. We're on the side of middle-income New Zealanders. We want them to be able to get ahead. But at the moment, for the last 2.5 years, their wages have gone backwards. They're facing the risk of rapidly rising interest rates and whether they can afford their repayments. They're struggling with the price of food. That is all about how you run the economy, and it's about how you manage your spending. It's managing how you manage your monetary policy, all those kinds of things. That's what you've got. That's what this Labour government needs to do, is develop a proper economic plan to actually help middle New Zealand. How much the wealthy do or don't own is irrelevant to that woman and that family sitting in a budgeting service trying to work out whether they're keeping their house or not today.
It's irrelevant in that 5-minute meeting. It's completely relevant to the overall situation in the economy, which has put them in the position where they're sitting in that meeting. You know what I'm saying?
Let's talk about how that could be relevant to that family.
Okay.
Maybe that budgeting service was publicly funded. Maybe it's had its funding cut and that person has to wait like a month or two to get an appointment to come and see a budgeting service.
Yeah.
Maybe it's from an NGO that gets its funding that way. Maybe that public funding helps that person's kids go to a daycare centre so she can work more hours and pay. I mean,
think about that number.
You know, it's so facetious what he's doing.
And think about that number. 200
so
billion.
Wrong.
200 billion is basically our GDP. So I mean, if let's say your salary was 60 grand, right? Imagine for some reason if you got another 60 grand that year, or let's say 50 grand because it's not quite the GDP, to help you fix up your house, do what you needed to do, to help you get rid of debt, that kind of stuff, you would be smoking it. So $200 billion in capital gains tax that we could have had, that other countries do, like has been said. Well, sorry, I'll probably spoiler. It's about to be said. And that where would that have left this country in right now? Yes, people would have paid more in tax. Yes, homeowners or business owners or property owners is probably the best, would have paid more. But the country overall, that would have helped that squeeze middle a shit ton if the uber wealthy or the rich had a capital gains tax on their second or third properties, Chewy.
Let's talk about Luxon talking about rising inflation. As you said, it's not rising at the moment.
Falling.
Rising unemployment. Weren't they saying we had to cull like 700,000 jobs out of the market to tame inflation?
Yep.
The government just printed money. Yes, keeping people in jobs during COVID.
And
keeping
alive.
The workplace. Without that, employers would have just cut bait. They would have sacked everyone. And those workers would have had to be paid somehow through unemployment benefits. Like, God help us if they were at the wheel when COVID hit.
Yeah. No.
Because this is the thinking that he has. It
would have been Simon Bridges who wanted to open up the borders immediately, and that would have had a huge number of more dead New Zealanders. And we know that because all the other countries that did it, one of our kindred countries, Western European countries, America has a better inflation than us at the moment at 5%. Every other one, Australia, England, UK, through France, through all of Europe, European Union is all above us. So this is this current talking about. I'm just going to put the freeze frame up there because I'm quite enjoying looking at his face like that. I don't know why. It's just making me happy.
Oh, yes, Compasa, faces of delight.
He's saying, and I just think that there is pushback coming, and I've noticed it. I'm glad that all these journalists have been watching us for a wee while, too, because there is pushback coming. I mean, there is some pushback coming. So speaking of, let's have a look at this. This is when they talked about taxing people and capital gains tax, and then I've got a little bit to add on to that, and then we're pretty much done for the week. Here we go.
Okay, I'm going to assume that you are not against collecting tax, that you think that people should pay tax on their income. So I'm just curious as to why you're so opposed to a capital gains tax.
Well, look, a capital gains tax is incredibly complex to implement, as we've seen in previous discussions.
Australia does it, Canada does it, other OECD countries do it. It's not impossible. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And let me just say this: if Luxon's like standard is it's too hard, then they are going to be a terrible government. Like if his standard is we're not going to do it because it's difficult, then what a terrible mandate to take through into a government. I mean, I don't suspect that is their position. I think it's the excuse right now for why he wants to say he's against it. I've got another reason that I think he might be against it, but let's just listen to this for a bit more.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. And they also have high house prices and a whole bunch of other things
as
well. And that's why I'm saying the main task of this government should be on running this economy properly and not trying to blame the rich for the problems that they've got with the economy at the moment. The real reason is this is a government that was the second highest spending, it was the fourth highest in printing cash, and it shut down the economy like no other country on earth.
And kept more people alive
domestic inflation
than most countries around the world through COVID. So we're leaving it there. Now the question was, why would you be against capital gains tax? Well, here's a reason that someone tagged me on today to remind me of. New National leader Christopher Luxon owns 7 properties. 2 of them are funded by taxpayers. New National leader Chris Luxon has spent his first morning in the job, so as we want to go, defending his impressive property portfolio, which numbers 7 buildings, 2 of which are effectively leased to taxpayers. Luxon is given a taxpayer-funded accommodation allowance to rent when in Wellington. Most MPs use it to rent flats or hotels, but some MPs buy accommodation in Wellington and use the allowance effectively rent the flats back to themselves. Luxon also owns his electorate office in Botany. Electorate MPs receive an allowance from Parliament to rent an office in their electorate. Luxon recently bought a building in his Botany electorate, which he now rents to Parliament for use as his office. Former Prime Minister John Key did a similar arrangement. And as Helensville said, while not common in Parliament, the arrangement is not unheard of. Luxon's deputy, Nicola Willis, does it. She is the beneficiary of a trust that owns 3 homes. So maybe that's the reason that he's not really for a capital gains tax, because it would personally impact him. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe.
I love the fact that she chucked in the 7 houses comment. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to say, look, I think it because it will personally affect them. I think it's because it's his back. It's really going to crush his backers. Like, it's not too hard to do a capital gains tax because you know what? It's income. It's just income. That's all. And yeah, the comparison to like, oh yeah, those places that do capital gains tax, they've got high house prices. Yeah, everywhere in the Western world has high tax prices because people like him got in and opened it up to investors, and the people with the capital to gobble up these houses gobbled them up. Operators like Airbnb came up, and now it's more profitable to have your house used a couple of weekends a month than to have a family in it. You know, it's just dog shit.
So when Ryan Bridge tries to say this is not real money, it may not be real folding stuff in your pocket, but as you've just said, when you've got that capital, you have the ability to go and use it to buy more assets, to get more wealthy on paper. So you're getting a financial advantage from it. When you're working at the supermarket, you're getting a financial advantage from your work in the form of wages that you pay tax on. When you've got enough money to purchase properties and you own them, you're getting a financial advantage by building your wealth and getting rent or someone else to pay for the properties you're buying. So it's just, it seems to me to be pretty bloody simple, actually.
Now, I hate to dogpile the dude, but I'm going to have to. There is one other thing that he mentions that really gets my goat. Middle New Zealanders with good jobs and good wages. New Zealand wages are dog shit. They absolutely are. That is why when Australia made their changes to their citizenship, people freaked the fuck out. Because there's going to be a massive brain drain. Everyone's going to go to Australia.
Police earn twice as much in Australia.
Absolutely. We train them up and we send them overseas because our wages have stayed so low for so long.
Yeah.
And then we have to bring in people to fill the gaps.
And if we had the capital gains tax and had $200 billion of extra tax intake, maybe our police and our nurses and our doctors in the public sector and our kindergarten teachers and our teachers could get paid better, and we could retain them, perhaps.
There are people that work in social services. I sell cell phones. I am not the linchpin of our society, right? But people that work in social services that really do help our society, our nurses, our police, the counsellors, people that work with kids, educators, they all get paid dog shit, and they're all looking overseas because places that do tax these people properly can pay these people properly, and it's a net gain for society. And it's just this base, like, why is this not just like, oh, yeah, that's how things work to these guys? Yeah. Is Luxon just completely divorced from the reality that the majority of this country lives in? These are the issues that Labour needs to be coming in and just wiping the floor with these guys, and they just miss it. And every time this happens, I go, I'm going to vote for Greens, right? But is there a way to vote even harder? Like, do I just really put it in the box? Does that count for more? Jesus.
I agree with you. And it was like, it's just the ball dropping is the big thing. It's like, do something, be inspirational. Like when National started using sort of a trope or an accusation towards Labour because there was some research that said the CEOs don't like this Labour government. I said on the show, several times, what you should be doing in Labour is coming out and going, fine, National can have the top 1%. We'll take the factory workers. That's fine. We don't care if the CEOs don't like us. But the thing is, it's all about money, and they've all got backers. And actually, the thing that is at the top of the apex of the political compass is money. And then you drop down to go left or right. And then you drop down to go authoritarian, libertarian. But the thing that starts at the peak for all of them is money. And, you see it worse in America. But I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say this out loud, but I wish I could have been advising some Labour Prime Minister at that time and saying, this is a chance for you to get back to your roots of being a working party and saying, we don't want the CEOs, we want the factory floor. And you know what? There's one fucking CEO. There's 200 people on the factory floor. I know who I'd rather have voting for me.
I was watching John Oliver before I came on tonight, and they were talking about the whole Bud Light trans shitstorm.
Yep.
Right. And he mentioned, like, if you've got a whole bunch of bigots that come out saying that you don't like that they don't like what the company is doing, and that they're not going to buy your product anymore, then you turn around and you go, good, it's not for you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I think the Labour Party should be. If they're going, oh, well, we don't want to upset business leaders and that sort of thing. No, you turn around and you go, no, this is not for you. This is for the 80-90% of the country that actually has to worry about the state of our schools.
This is not the party
how
for
many
you.
police we have, how well our social services are funded, whether we're keeping duopolies in line, whether we're keeping the banking sector in line, whether we're building nice new hospitals that don't stand up just purely because of the black mold in the walls, that are full of nurses that are paid well and have sensible hours, that we have people training to be engineers and doctors and researchers and things that keep this country progressing, rather than constantly hemorrhaging them to places that do have money and do it properly.
Yeah.
It's infuriating that we have so much talent in this country. We have so many people training to do big things, and we lose them. And we lose them to countries that we shouldn't lose them to.
Yeah, no, I agree. Speaking about voting for the Greens, as you just said there, Mr. Anderson says the Greens need to get their house in order. It's a disaster area. And I think with what's happening with, bullying and that kind of stuff, allegations of at the moment, I tend to agree that needs to happen as well. Now, let's say thanks to all our patrons, and a huge hello and welcome. We had someone sign up during the show to, I think it was White Mouse. White Mouse signed up during the show. White Mouse, your name's not going to be up here until Monday because you signed up during the show. But a huge thanks to our patrons who are on board to, support what we're doing. Remember, there's many ways you can support us. One is you can become a patron. That's by going to patreon.com/Big Hairy News. And there are numerous levels there. We never got our $250 a month for our 250th show, but, we weren't really expecting that, to be honest. But if you want to be involved with us like that, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. If you are a patron, then this Saturday there's a virtual meetup. White Mouse, you'll get sent your invite in the next 24 hours. And other than that, the other thing you can do is share our stuff. Follow us on all the social medias, me and Chewy and personal accounts. Also, Facebook, we're on for Big Hairy News. There's a couple of you watching there. Most people obviously watch on YouTube. Make sure you have subscribed to the YouTube channel. That's a massive advantage. More people that subscribe, the more algorithms for other people it pops up in. And tell people about us. And we're really enjoying this month's been really good. It's been something's building, guys. And if you're a fan of what we do, and this is like not even about us, but we're aware that this is very unique in New Zealand, that I can list probably 5, if not more, either right to far right independent broadcasters that people know the names of. From the Chantal Baker, Family First is doing one now. Sean Plunket. There's a thing called the Common Room, which is more like a right-wing think tank than a far right, but it's there. Obviously, Counterspin. There's lots of these things over on the right, sowing mis and disinformation up until this year's election. I know that Martin Bomber Bradbury does a pretty good thing each week. He's an interesting cat. And I don't think he's necessarily where he used to be when it comes to politics and on the left. I have nothing against Bomber. I used to know when he worked at Channel Z. But there's no one doing what we're doing. We're it. And the way we continue to grow is with your support. Now, I'm not even necessarily saying financial. If it wants to be financial, fantastic. We love you for it. It helps us pay the bills. But also the biggest thing is to be our advocates. Tell people about us. Tell them what we're doing. Share our stuff around. Follow us on Twitter. When you see a clip come up, share it around if it resonates with you. And tell people about us. Then we can grow. If we grow, we're getting between 500 and 1,000 views a day, an episode at the moment, which is pretty good for a little old country like us. You think about in America, and that's on all platforms, by the way. In America is 70 times our size. We got some of these big people, these big kind of American live stream type things having kind of 2,000 and 3,000 live stream viewers. We get 50, we're at 60 right now, times that by 70, that's like 6 sevens of 42. That's sort of the equivalent, 4,500 proportionally. So, we're growing, we're building, and we want your help to be involved. And if you want us to continue what we're doing, you want us to be able to get some of these leaders, then the way we do that is through size. Size counts, apparently, Chewy. Someone told me that once. And that certainly helps for us getting guests and getting access, and especially coming up to the election doing stuff. So, off my soapbox, just saying thank you very much for people who are on board financially. Thank you for watching and supporting us in this as well. And really, as with any kind, I guess, of broadcast, it can only be as successful as the people who are behind it, either viewing, advocating, or financially contributing. That's really the truth.
I'm definitely loving the theme of people signing up during the show as well.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right, so we do have a meet-up on Saturday morning, 11 a.m. New Zealand time. If you are already a patron, then you'll have had your invitation. If you signed up during the show today, you won't. If you sign up at all before basically 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock on Saturday morning to become a patron, you'll get the invite sent to you. It's just it's not a live stream, sorry. It's just a virtual meetup where you guys can come along, ask us any questions. We really take feedback as well. People who have been involved with doing this before have given us feedback and suggestions, and we take it all on board and we listen. And we'd like to hear from you and what you've got to say. So if you want to be involved, 11 a.m. Saturday morning, just by being a patron. If you're not a patron yet, you can go and be one. If you are already, love to see you. I think Chewy's going to come along to at least some of this weekend's conversation because he can. And other than that, I think we're done for the week. Chew Meister General.
Yeah, it's been a very ranty week for me, hasn't it? I do like going on a bit of a tear. Thank you for putting up with me.
Doing great work, guys. Oh, what did that say? I missed the end of it. Something about Otipoti.
Doing great work, guys. Great that you're here in Otipoti.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Chewy
Blake
gives
is
his
on to me
for the campaign. Here's something else for you guys, people listening and watching. I'm going to drop you in a bit, Chewy. There's a few episodes coming up in the next few weeks that I'm not going to be available for. And I want Chewy to run and organise the show. And I think, Chewy, if I'm honest, I think that you might be a bit kind of, about it. We need to encourage Chewy, and we need Chewy to be doing this and coming on board. And it can be like, you can do like Rant FM those nights. You can have like Uber rants and bring on some of your communist friends. And
we're going to change the name of the show to, you know what really grinds my gears? And I'm just going to get more and more wound up.
That's quite a good name for a podcast, Grinds My Gears. It probably is one, actually. I quite like that.
It's actually an old drinking game that I used to play.
Yeah.
You'd have a house party or whatever, and the idea was that someone would have to give you a prompt or something like checkered tea towels, and you had to go on an increasingly more unhinged and angry rant about this particular object. I loved it.
Sounds good. You would win that every night, wouldn't you?
I absolutely smashed it.
All right, team. For those of you who will see on Saturday morning, we'll see you on Saturday morning. For those of you who don't come on Saturday morning, we will see you 9 p.m. Monday night for another edition of the Big Hairy News. Love you to bits. We'll see you next week. Hooroo.